doctors telling you that you're not going to walk again. It's an informed opinion that they're giving you.
And then immediately my body jerked forward. My face hit the ground and I was paralyzed from the waist down because I didn't want to do anything else in my life.
Everything you knew about yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, taken away in one fell swoop.
I wanted to prove the doctors wrong because I knew if I could prove the doctors wrong, then I could rejoin my Marines. The only thing I wanted to do was be a Marine, and I was living out my dream. Never envisioned that a bullet would.
What do people need to understand about resilience that highlight reel version of your story doesn't tell?
I was gonna hop down the trench. That's when I felt this loud pop.
Patrick, welcome to the Unemployment Diaries.
Thanks for having me, Aisha.
Tell me a little bit about what happened July 2017, if you don't mind. What happened and how did you react to what happened?
Yeah, so July 12th, 2017, that's the day that a bullet tore through my body and the only life that I ever wanted. So to understand the gravity and context of that situation, I need to give you a quick background. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, always knew I wanted to serve in the military. Grandfather served as a naval aviator. My dad served as a Marine. And I only applied to one school for college, applied to the Citadel. Knew from such a young age that military was the path for me. Growing up, above our fireplace, we had a picture of my grandfather in his uniform, my dad in his uniform. There was a third photo, it was blank. And from a young age, every single time I would go to the living room, look up at the fireplace, I told myself that I would fill out that third photo. So when the time came, went to the Citadel, settled on the Marine Corps, and commissioned as a Marine Corps infantry officer in 2013. Became a platoon commander, so I was in charge of 40 Marines and sailors. Did my first deployment to Southeast Asia, came back. Our next deployment was going to be to North Africa and the Middle East, and I became the company executive officer. So now I was going to be second in command of 170 Marines. But 5 days into the deployment, that's when everything changed. It was actually on a training mission during the deployment. We were in Hawaii, company of Marines. We flew out, all 170 of us. We were going to do a week-long live fire training. Live fire meaning we were using real bullets and ammunition. And it was on the final night, we were doing a platoon attack. I was off with the maneuver element. We were closing on the objective, or the notional enemy, as you will. The two Marines ahead of me, they jumped down into the trench system, and I was looking to figure out how I was going to hop down with all my gear and equipment. And as I was making my plans of how I was going to hop down the trench, that's when I felt this loud pop. And then immediately my body jerked forward. My face hit the ground, and I was paralyzed from the waist down. And I was freaking out. I was like, what the heck just happened? And then I immediately get on the radio. I said, hey, doc, something just happened. I need you to come over, check things out. So I hear the doc sprinting over. He assesses my wounds. He said, hey, sir, you got shot. I was like, what? He's like, yeah, you got shot. And he said, but I can't find an exit wound. And if you get shot, you want the bullet to go in and out. And where it hit me, the bullet had fractured my left pelvis, ripped through my intestines, and lodged in my hip. I didn't know this at the time, but as soon as he told me that, my stomach started to swell like somebody was blowing up a balloon. And that is immediately when the pain just started to hit. The only way I can describe it is imagine somebody has a blowtorch on your entire lower body and it's just like unrelenting.
Jeez.
So I'm paralyzed, I'm in this pain, and I'm freaking out internally. But I was also one of the leaders on the ground, and the Marine Corps does a really good job of drilling into its leaders of the power of emotional contagion. So essentially how emotions spread from individual to individual. And if you're in a leadership position, it's especially prevalent. So if I was nervous, screaming, crying, then I would have those emotions go to my Marines. And at the moment, we were fighting against what's called the golden hour. So if you get a severe injury in the military, it was drilled into us. You need to get that person to the next level of medical care within 60 minutes or an hour. Otherwise, their chance of survival would just significantly decrease. So the clock started after I got hit, and managing my pain, And then the next thing I know, my Marine said, "Hey, sir, we got a helicopter inbound and it'll be here in 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes felt like an eternity, but I did my best to remain as calm as I could be because I didn't want them to know how dire of a situation that I felt that it was. Helicopter comes. I get loaded on the helicopter away from my Marines, and I tell the doc on board, because I'm away from my Marines now. I said, "Doc, you got to give me something for this pain. Like, it is unbearable." Next thing I know, I feel this shot in my arm. He gives me a shot of fentanyl. He's like, "You should feel this instantaneously." 15 seconds goes by, nothing. 30 seconds goes by, nothing. I'm like, "Doc, this isn't working. Like, you need to give me another shot or find something." He's like, "That's all I'm authorized to give you." I was like, "What?" And it was at that moment, I'm in the helicopter, it's cold, it's dark. And I'm just having this internal conversation with myself of telling myself, "Hey, find a way to stay awake. Like, find a way to stay conscious," because I thought if I closed my eyes, if I went unconscious, then I wouldn't survive the night. So I kept on telling myself, find a way. And next thing I know, about 20 minutes later, get to the next level of medical care, get put on a hospital bed, and I wake up a few days later to a prognosis that I don't wish on my worst enemy. So I woke up, I had a feeding tube down my throat, I had blurry vision from all the pain meds, so I couldn't even make out people's faces. I just could see just that they were like blobs. And after a few days of that, I had learned that I wasn't dreaming. I learned that this was actually my new reality. And the prognosis was never going to walk again, never going to go to the bathroom independently. That's pure poop. And then never have children. And I was 26 years old at the time.
You're a baby.
Yeah. I thought they were, again, I thought I was dreaming again because this happened during a training injury. This happened to me. And I just was in disbelief this entire time. I don't know if it was the medicine. I don't know if it was just my thoughts, but in those early weeks, that was what was going through my mind.
How did you get to that point where you refused the diagnosis, though? Because you have these expert, doctors telling you that you're not going to walk again. It's an informed opinion that they're giving you. You're likely surrounded by people who are terrified, scared, sad as well.
Totally.
So if emotional contagion is a thing, I'm sure you were feeling, the weight of those that loved you and watching you experience this. So how did you find that in you to refuse the diagnosis?
It was a long path, but I ended up being in the hospital in Hawaii for about 6 weeks. And I had my commanding officer, he came and visited me. And when he came and visited me, he brought this book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And he read a passage from the book. And he read to me, "Anything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." And then he shut the book. He put it on my nightstand. He looked me in the eye and he said, "I know you. I know you're a fighter. And I know you'll find a way through." So that gave me the confidence at that stage of recovery that it was within my control to fight. I couldn't control the diagnosis, but I could control if I decided to fight through it or not. And then once I got healthy enough to travel, they sent me to Walter Reed. Walter Reed's in Bethesda, Maryland, so just north of Washington, D.C. And it was there the reason why I wanted to prove the doctors wrong, because I knew if I could prove the doctors wrong, then I could rejoin my Marines, because I didn't want to do anything else in my life. The only thing I wanted to do was be a Marine, and I was living out my dream. Never envisioned that a bullet would shatter that. Not only my lifelong dream, my profession, my purpose, and now my actual body due to all the damage that the bullet caused. So I knew if I could prove the doctors wrong in those three things, then that would give me the ticket to go back to the Marine Corps and go back to my Marines.
I want to talk more about your recovery and the steps you took after that. But I want to dig a little bit into your mindset, because this podcast is all about beliefs, the beliefs that we hold really strongly. And identity is possibly one of the strongest set of beliefs that we hold.
Totally.
So I'll read something that I saw in one of your interviews.
Yeah.
My early career as a Marine Corps officer was everything I hoped it would be: demanding, purposeful, grounded in something greater than myself. Few people find their calling in life, but I had found mine. How did you cope with having everything you knew about yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, taken away in one fell swoop?
I think it's because early on, I wasn't willing to accept it. So it was still my identity to be a Marine until like somebody told me that I was no longer a Marine. So I still had that hope, and hope is one of the most powerful beliefs out there. And I clung to that belief in those early stages of recovery because that allowed me to get through the darkest days that I had early on, and to get through the days where I wasn't making the progress that I thought I needed to make, because there were a lot of weeks to where there was no visible progress. So I had no idea if I was edging closer to rejoining my Marines or edging closer towards medically retiring.
Wow. So ironically, the identity that you had that you eventually had to relinquish or change is the identity that gave you the tools to get through that recovery.
Yes.
You mentioned Viktor Frankl, and I read in one of your articles that you focused on his idea of small victories, the first time going to the bathroom by yourself, the first steps you're taking. How do you, first of all, break down your recovery into something manageable when the people who are aiding you with your recovery are telling you, no, it's not happening, you're not going to walk again?
Yeah.
And second of all, how do you not get down on yourself when the only thing you're able to do is maybe take a step, or the only thing you're able to do is get to the bathroom by yourself?
Yeah. For me, I had a conversation with my doctor. It was about the 3-month mark. And I said, how can I make progress proving you guys wrong, essentially? And one of the first steps was, well, let's take out your catheter and see if you can reteach yourself how to go to the bathroom. Because if you can do that, then that would be a small victory. So I was like, okay, like what does that entail? It entails a very uncomfortable medical process. I can go into it if you want. If not, totally cool. But essentially, I had to reteach myself how to go to the bathroom because my mind-body connection was broken. So I would feel the urge to go to the bathroom, but I physically wouldn't be able to do it. So I would have to self-cath, and it's just a very painful process. But that was the only way that I could do it. And I remember originally when they told me what would be required, first of all, I almost threw up in my mouth. And then I went back to my room and I had my parents there and I said, listen, like this is what is going to be required if I want to do it. I don't know if I want to do it. And they talked some sense into me and said, like, you said this is important. This will put you one step closer to like your ultimate goal of staying in the Marine Corps, rejoining your Marines. So you're just going to have to embrace this discomfort for however long it lasts. So the next day I go and begin my journey. And 6 weeks later, I was able to reteach myself how to go to the bathroom. But it was the most demanding, the most grueling, the most uncomfortable 6 weeks of the entire recovery. But it was also one of the most rewarding because not being reliant on a catheter anymore to do basic human just activities of daily living, that gave me a huge confidence boost. And then once I had that, I wanted to know, okay, what was next? And the next thing for me was the ability to walk, because I had been in a wheelchair these first 3-4 months and I didn't want to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. So I started regaining feeling back on my left leg, and the main injury was to my right leg at this point in time. So from my knee down, I was completely paralyzed. From my knee up, the only muscle that worked was my quad. So they said, you need to get your right quad strong enough to utilize this brace in order to be able to walk again. I said, okay, what's required? You need to get it at a 4 out of 5 strength. I said, sounds simple enough. What's it at now? And I remember they're like, all right, push against my hand. I'm like I'm pushing. They're like, it's a 1 out of 5. So I was like, okay, got a lot of work to do. I was so weak at that time. So the next day I show up to physical therapy. I get on a program. I'm like, okay, I just got to show up, put in the work, and eventually it'll get stronger. The first thing they have me do is get on an exercise bike. I'm sure you've been on an exercise bike, right? Yeah. Like get on the exercise bike and I'm pedaling. Nothing's turning on. I look, I make sure it's plugged in. It's plugged in. And I asked the physical therapist, I said, what's up with this bike? It's not turning on. And she said, you're not strong enough to turn on the bike. I was like, what? Like, it doesn't take that much effort to turn on an exercise bike, but I couldn't turn it on. So that was pretty demoralizing because I'm used to being in very good shape physically. Like, that was the least of my worries. And now it's my main worry. Like, I can't even turn an exercise bike. Like, this is going to be such a long and arduous journey. But like most things, the thing that helped me was continue to showing up, putting in the work, and seeing the actual progress. So after about a week of showing up, I was able to turn on the bike. And then once I turned it on, I was able to get to level 1, to level 2, so on and so forth, to where I eventually got my legs strong enough to where I could move from a wheelchair to a walker. And once I got to a walker, I'm a big believer in the phrase, like, you can't manage what you don't measure. So I wanted to be able to like measure my progress or lack thereof on a daily basis, just to prove to myself and give myself these tiny victories that I was progressing. So one of the ways that I did that was every day after dinner, because at this time I'm living in a hospital. So when I say I'm living at Walter Reed, I'm literally living in a hospital room. Like, that's where I get all my meals. That's where I go to sleep. Like, that's where I do everything. Because where I was stationed before was out in California, but now I'm in Bethesda, Maryland, just living at the hospital.
And where was your family at this time? Were you by yourself at Walter Reed?
So my parents, they dropped everything. They made sure that every day, one of them was with me. So every Sunday, they would alternate driving from Cleveland. So Cleveland's about a 6-hour drive to Walter Reed. So they would do a changeover every week just to make sure in those first 6-7 months, one of them was always by my side, which was huge for the recovery. Because there were a lot of other service members that were just there by themselves. Like, the only support they had was from their doctors, their nurses. Not everybody had the luxury of having a family member with them the entire time. Like, my parents went to physical therapy with me, to occupational therapy. But that was another driving force of, it never came in my mind to throw in the towel and like give up and not fight, but that just gave extra incentive. It's like, listen, they're sacrificing everything. Like, they gave up work. They gave up a lot of things to be here. I can't just lay in a bed all day. So they were with me when I decided after dinner to show progress to walk a mile. And I would go to the indoor gym. Walter Reed had this indoor gym, and I'd be with my walker. And I remember the first time I timed myself doing a mile. I finish, I look at my watch, 48 minutes to walk 1 mile. I'm sure you've walked a mile before, but I'm sure you did it in 15, 16, 17 minutes. And I was clocking in at 48 minutes.
Wow.
But I needed a baseline. I needed a way to measure my progress. So then every day after dinner, go back to that track, do the mile, look at my watch, and slowly see that number go down. So those were the things that helped me achieve those goals early on in recovery, of being able to track my progress or lack thereof on a day-to-day basis and like adjust my plan accordingly.
It's like giving yourself smaller goals relative to the entire recovery journey that you could meet and get to that milestone and then get to the next one.
Yeah.
Were there times where you were sad, depressed even, or wanted to give up? I know you said your parents were a huge driving force. You wanted to get back into the Marine Corps. So you had these big motivating factors, but did it ever get hard?
Yeah. The time where it got hard, so I just was able to walk, and that gave me confidence that if I can walk, like maybe I can one day run. And then if I can run, I can stay in the Marines, so on and so forth. One of my doctors came in, this was at like the 6-7 month mark. And he said, "You're young, you're healthy. I've been looking at your information and your injury. there was an experimental surgery performed on somebody with a similar injury like the year prior, and it was successful. The surgery would require him opening me back up, reconnecting the nerve where it was severed, because right now I had a severed right sciatic nerve, biggest nerve in your lower body. He said, I'm going to open you up, find where the nerve was severed, reconnect it, like graft it, and the nerve would regenerate on its own. Because nerves grow, I didn't know this, but nerves grow about an inch a month. So where it had severed, it was...
That's news to me.
Yeah, it was pretty high up in my gluteus maximus. But it would take about a year if he was able to reconnect it to get a full recovery. So I was all for it. He said it couldn't get any worse. It's worth a shot. I said, let's do it. So he said, we'll plan the surgery for a few weeks, have you heal a little bit more. Surgery scheduled for a Monday. It's supposed to be this big surgery. Like everybody at the hospital knows about it. Doctors, nurses, my friends know about it. My Marines know about it. The doctor had practiced over the weekend on a cadaver just to make sure that he was ready for the surgery. Monday comes. I get wheeled into surgery. I get wheeled out of surgery. And I'm in the waiting area. I'm eating Chick-fil-A because I told my parents, I was like, because this was surgery number 14. So I wanted something to look forward to after all these surgeries.
And Chick-fil-A was the answer.
So for me, my comfort food was Chick-fil-A. I'd do spicy chicken sandwich, milkshake, the works.
Solid order.
Yeah, good order. And I'm there eating my Chick-fil-A, waiting for the doctor to come in and let me know how surgery went. Doctor comes in and he's like expressionless, and which is unusual for him. And he stands at the foot of my bed and he looks me in the eye and he said the surgery was unsuccessful. And like my mouth dropped. I was like, that was an option? Because I don't know. I'm the most optimistic person that you can meet, maybe. I don't know. I'm very optimistic. I think everything's going to work out. And this was me realizing that surgery being unsuccessful, like that was a possibility. Like that never factored in that it would be unsuccessful despite the odds, despite it being experimental. Like I always thought that it would work out. So I was like, what does this mean? He's like, we'll come back next week and talk through a game plan for your medical care. And later that night, I'm in my hospital bed and I get a phone call from my Marines because they're still on the deployment that I was supposed to be on. And I know they're going to ask me a question that I don't want to answer. They're going to ask me, when are you coming back? So the phone call comes. I answer and they say, hey, when are you coming back? How'd the surgery go? And I said, I'm not coming back. The surgery is unsuccessful. And it was after I said the word unsuccessful that I immediately started crying my eyes out. And this was the first time in my adult life that I had ever cried. Never cried in the Marines. Never cried at the Citadel. Never cried in high school. And I cried for a good 20 to 30 minutes. And it was later that night that I did some reflection of, why was I crying so hard? And it was because up until that moment, I had this belief that despite the prognosis, despite the injury, I would still find my way back to my Marines and like my career and profession and calling. And this was the first time that it hit me that that's no longer going to be an option. Like the life, the career, everything that I had envisioned was gone because I'm not going to be able to make a full recovery. I'm not going to be able to stay in the Marine Corps. And it all hit me at once. And the way that I processed it in the moment was through crying. And I remember before I went to bed that night, after I wiped my tears, I said, you're going to give yourself 24 hours. 24 hours to feel sorry for yourself. 24 hours to be the victim, get it out of your system. Then after those 24 hours, you're going to find a way to make the most out of this situation. And after those 24 hours, I had another conversation with myself to whereas I said, I need more than 24 hours because I don't know where I'm going. I had one direction from when I was a young age, and that path was the military and the Marine Corps. Now it's like that's going to be coming to an end. And there's so many different paths that I can go down and pursue. And it's very overwhelming. So I made sure that I reached out to folks, like obviously my parents who were there with me, my siblings, my friends, of what do you guys think I should be doing? Like, I have no idea. And one of the things was, I think you need to talk to somebody about it, because in the early stages of my time at Walter Reed, they meant well, but there would be therapists that would come to my room like almost every day. And I didn't connect with any of them. I felt like they were judging me, and I just kind of shooed them off. Like, no, I'm fine. Like, I'm going to be back to my Marine soon enough. Like, I don't want to talk, because there is this somewhat of a taboo culture in the Marine Corps of, if you do seek help, if you do have any, like mental health issues, that like, that's an automatic, you're going to be no longer
it's like perceived as a weakness, or
that's what it was at the time. It's gotten a lot better for sure, but that was another reason why I didn't really want to seek help early on, because I didn't want to give them a reason for me not to stay in. But now I was getting out, so I was like, yes, I will talk to somebody and see if I connect with somebody. So the next week I was like, okay, I'm going to go to therapy, see if it works, give it a chance. And I'm in the waiting area, and I'm looking around the waiting area. I see a service member, no arms, no legs. I see another service member, one leg. And then this other service member comes up to me, looks relatively healthy, but again, probably has some invisible wounds. But he sits next to me, and he's like, hey, you're new here. He introduced himself to me. There's some small talk. And I don't remember much of the conversation, but I remember one thing that he said before he left. He said, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And he's like, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're like putting forth an effort. So went into that conversation with the therapist, finally connected with one of them, and had a really, really good conversation, good discussion. Ended up seeing them a few more times. But one of the big learnings that I had from those sessions was this term called cognitive reappraisal, which sounds super fancy, but the simplified version is essentially, how are you reframing, trauma, adversity, setbacks that like happened to you in life. And I had been not doing the greatest job of that early on, because I had been hearing a lot of people tell me, oh, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to you. This is terrible. Like, you're going to have to start over, this or that. And I started to believe them for the longest time, until I found out that there was a different way. Like, I had the ability to control how I reframed that trauma, that adversity, this, what I call like crucible moment, for myself. Like, other people could influence it, but at the end of the day, it's up to me to reframe it in a way that, number one, I believe in, and number two, will do my best to like live out. So that came at a time where I really needed it, because I didn't want to go down the path of reframing the experience negatively, because that would have been the easiest way to do it. Because I go back to something that my dad would tell me and my siblings growing up. He said, you can rationalize everything. And I took that as, in this situation, right? Like, you can find a reason to make it the worst thing that could ever happen to me, right? My career's ending. My body's physically different for the future. Like, all these quote unquote bad things. But it's only a bad thing if you say that it's a bad thing, which is what I later found. It would have been harder for me to accept that line of reasoning at the beginning.
Right. You had to kind of go.
Yeah, it took me time to really understand the power of that. And that's something that I still live out to this day. And it's something that when I do face adversity in life or setbacks in life, now I know one of my things that I look to is, how can I reframe this in a positive light, or reframe it as an opportunity, or just knowing that I have the ability, back to like Viktor Frankl, I can choose how to respond. I can choose what direction and what phrase and what meaning that I give to that situation.
So what reframe did you use for this? Because you didn't just recover, you became team captain for the US for the Invictus Games. So you went from a paralysis diagnosis to an athlete and a competitive athlete at that on a world stage. So what's this reframe that you found for what I think many people would agree is a pretty bleak outcome?
Totally. I don't know if it's the right reframe, but it's a reframe that helped me. It's a reframe that keeps it open to interpretation. So I started to view it as, hey, getting shot is going to turn out to be the best thing that could ever happen to me. So now anytime I'm making a decision or I'm going down a certain path, I'm reminded that I have to find ways to make sure that I'm not wasting this experience that I had, this adversity that I had. I'm trying to make it the best thing that could ever happen to me in order to be the best version of myself, to impact others. And it's just led to this constant pursuit of growth. And I'm a big believer. I just read this book, Mindset by Carol Dweck, and she talks about like growth mindset, fixed mindset. And one of those things that I had been unknowingly doing has been viewing these quote unquote adversity moments as opportunities for learning and for growth, as opposed to viewing them in a different light as, you know, the fixed mindset would have been like, hey, my body's physically damaged. I shouldn't push myself physically. I should just accept it. Same thing with mentally. You know, I am retired. Like I could just have a fixed mindset of like living off my retirement, keeping to myself. But the growth mindset in me is like, no, now this is an opportunity to find ways to grow mentally. So that's why grad school came into the mix. It's like, I don't know what else in career paths are out there because I had been so tunnel vision from a young age on it's military or bust. But now the military is no longer an option. So now I needed to see what's out there. So having that growth mindset in those situations and in any situation in life, viewing it as a learning and growing opportunity has significantly helped with me living out to how this is going to be the best thing that could ever happen to me.
And it's an easy thing for someone who hasn't gone through it to roll your eyes at. It's like, well, yeah, of course you'll say that you should make the best out of, you know, the
Totally.
hard situation, make lemonade out of lemons. But when someone like you or someone like Viktor Frankl, who's, you know, Nazi concentration camp survivor, can say, you know, you'll make what you want to make out of the situation based on your mindset, you tend to pay attention. And you mentioned business school. Is that the next thing you did as you recovered and you came out of Walter Reed? And then how did you end up captaining Team USA? And how did you get from like physically even to that level that you could compete?
It all happened kind of in tandem. So I ended up retiring from the military late 2019, early 2020, which that's when COVID happened.
Right. So this is like 3 years or 2.5 years after your injury.
Yeah. So I was recovering at Walter Reed for about 2 years and then went on a medical board. That took some time and knew I wanted to go to grad school because I wanted to expose myself to what different career paths are out there. So I settled on getting my master's in business and then master's in public policy. So when I was at graduate school, I was missing something. And it was, for me, it was more of a purpose and sense of belonging, like the physical part and part of more of a community. And I found that throughout my life through sport. And I miss sport, like the power of sport, competing and being a part of representing my country again for life.
Yeah.
And then I had heard when I was leaving Walter Reed, one of my physical therapists, she had talked to me about the Invictus Games. I had no idea what they were. So for those of you that don't know, like I didn't know, most people have probably heard of the Olympics. Maybe you've heard of the Paralympics. Think of the Invictus Games as the Paralympics, but it's only for wounded service members. So you have to have gotten wounded in your country's branch of military service. Right now, it's up to about 25 nations, and it's started by Prince Harry out of the UK. It's every 2 years. They have sports like rowing, track and field, cycling, swimming, like typical sports that you'd see at the Olympics or Paralympics. And that had been my mindset when I left Walter Reed, because I thought if I was able to make Team USA for the Invictus Games team, then I would have recovered to the extent that would have been to where I would have been content with. Because that would have meant that I would have pushed the limits to my recovery. Because if you get selected for the Invictus Games, it's not like you're going straight from the couch to the Invictus Games. A lot of the competitors compete in their respective countries, like Paralympics and stuff like that. So I knew if I can make that sort of recovery, then not only would it help me personally, but I would also have a platform now to like help others on a more of a global scale. So while I was in graduate school, I was also training to make the team, because it's not a guarantee to make the team, because a lot of people want to be on the team. So I found out in 2022 that I got selected for the team, and then ended up being team captain, which was a huge honor. And in 2023, went to Dusseldorf, Germany, where the games were held, and ended up competed in powerlifting, and ended up winning the bronze medal by like less than a point. So it was a very, very close matchup. Yeah.
And you were still in grad school at this point?
I just graduated grad school in May of 2023. Invictus Games were September of 2023.
Wow. So yeah, in tandem and in parallel is right. There's a very loud voice in my head saying that I'm lazy right now. Like, what am I doing? I get tired by 11 a.m.
Well, then the next month I went to Tanzania for Mount Kilimanjaro.
Well, now you're just showing off. Well, talk to me a little bit about business school, because in our first conversation, you told me that you felt imposter syndrome. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, you've been shot. They told you were going to be paralyzed. You've captained, an international team representing your country. How can you have imposter syndrome for going to school? Like, that seems like a light lift relative to everything you went through. What do you think that says about confidence? And is it an end state, or are there always things that are going to shake your confidence?
When I got to business school, surrounded by some of the smartest people that I've ever met. And I knew I had the physical horsepower, but I didn't know if I had the intellectual horsepower, because from a young age, I never viewed myself as the most intelligent person in any room. Never envisioned going to an Ivy League school, let alone two. Never even applied to an Ivy League school. I only applied to one school in undergrad. And I think I just built this unshakable confidence throughout recovery, just proving to myself. The one thing that I now try to live my life by is not self-selecting. So I want other people to tell me no. So like, I wanted Harvard to tell me no. I wanted Wharton to tell me no. I didn't want to like say, I don't think I'm good enough for this school. Like, let me put in the application, try my hardest, and like let the chips fall where they may. And then once I got to school, met all my classmates, realized, yes, they have very, very high intellectual horsepower, but there's other things that I brought to the table that they didn't necessarily bring. And one of the things that is one of my, I would say is my superpower, is just my ability to put my head down and work. So classes would start, I think it was at like 9 or something like that. I'd show up to school campus at like 8 a.m. So I get there for like an hour, prep for like my day's classes, one of like a few people there. And when I was in my classes, I knew I was behind, because a lot of my classmates came from consulting, banking, finance, all this stuff. I was studying warfare for the last, 7 years. So this was all new to me. So I went to almost every single office hours in order to like make up for my knowledge deficit. So I was able to get up to speed relatively quickly, only because of the sheer volume of repetitions that I got, not only in the classroom, but in the office hours, as well as just my own independent study, as well as the advice I had gotten from a veteran who was a year above us, because he pursued consulting. He got 3 offers from the firms. I said, how did you do it? 3 offers from 3 of the top firms. He said, I treated the first 4 or 5 months like a deployment. It's like, what do you mean? He said, every day or every hour of his day was structured, and he very rarely, which is difficult at a very social environment like business school to do, but he said he would only give himself 1, maybe 2 days to like do something like social. Otherwise, it was heads down on academics and on recruiting for consulting.
I mean, you're showing a tremendous amount of grit and determination and qualities that you brought from, your marine background. When things got hard, and I'm assuming not everything was straightforward, despite working very hard towards everything that you were trying to accomplish. What were your go-to strategies when you needed to recalibrate? Was it rest? Was it socializing? Like, how did you take time away from what you were working towards so that you wouldn't burn out? Or I guess that's a leading question. Would you burn out?
I don't think I burned out at all. For me, physical exercise has always been the number one thing that I turn to. If I'm stressed, if I need to take my mind off of things. And it doesn't have to be something like super intense, super rigorous. It could be a 30-minute walk. It could be 60 minutes slow bike ride, but just something to take my mind off of things, whether it's listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook, to music. The one thing that I took from the military is making sure that physical fitness is a part of my everyday life. So 7 days a week, I'm doing something physical every single day, like without fail. It's funny, I get into conversations with my girlfriend. She's like, you're so disciplined when it comes to working out. But I don't view being disciplined in that realm because I enjoy doing it. I view discipline as you're only disciplined if you're doing something that you don't really enjoy doing. So I'm not disciplined when it comes to working out because I enjoy it. I look forward to it. I don't have to force myself to do it. It's just like I eat 2-3 meals a day. I'm going to work out as well. It's just part of my daily, what we call like battle rhythm. Like if I don't do it, that's when I'll go crazy.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening, myself included, that would like to have that level of discipline, or I guess you don't call it discipline, but like enjoyment of something that it makes it easy so that you can then use your effort, let's say, towards other things that you want to work towards. And then, so you ended up becoming a management consultant after grad school.
Yeah.
Why did you leave management consulting?
Yeah. So I moved to New York. I wanted to be in the biggest city in the world, best city in the world.
Welcome.
Yeah. And I wanted to do consulting because I was between consulting and banking. Those are the two common paths for veterans from business school programs. I chose consulting because if I went the banking route, I didn't want a life and career in finance. I kind of wanted optionality, and I wanted to be able to work in a bunch of different industries and sectors and problems and the whole works. I get to consulting in my first year. I'm in our private equity practice. So working with private equity firms. It was good. It was intense, like working until 1 or 2 a.m. most nights, but I knew that expectation going in. The expectation wasn't that I was going to be a 9-to-5 cush. Like I went there like full learning mode. I knew that I needed private sector experience so I could understand how the real world like worked, operated, because again, it's in the Marine Corps. Grad school is great, but it's all like academics. It's theory. It's not actually, you're not in the real world. You're in like this make-believe world.
Yeah.
So I knew in order to get up to speed and get up to speed quickly, it was to join our private equity practice. So I did that for the first year, really enjoyed it, learned a lot, realized this is not something I want to do in the future. So then shifted to our government practice. So working with the US military, the government, just wanted to see if I were to stay in consulting, like, is this a path? Did that for another year. It was fine, but didn't fire me up. And I gave myself 2 years. I was going to pick my head up after the 2-year mark and really assess if this was something that I wanted to do. And I kind of had a big realization one night. I was at the New York office. So it's in Hudson Yards. I was looking out at One World Trade, kind of like daydreaming. And I thought back to a class that I took at Wharton. It was called Strategic Brand Management. And in that class, one of the exercises was you need to reach out to your friends, your family, and even strangers. And they had to write, 3 to 5 words that come to mind when they think of you. Once you compile the information, you put it into this software that creates a word cloud. Bigger the word, more often that it's referenced for you. So I did the assignment, compiled all the responses, and my biggest words were inspiring, motivating, resilient, disciplined. And now I'm looking out at 1 a.m., One World Trade. And I felt like I was doing none of that. I guess you can argue I was being disciplined being at the office, but I wasn't inspiring anybody. I wasn't motivating anybody. I wasn't really utilizing the strengths that I had. And that's when I knew that I needed to make a change. And the 2-year mark was coming up. So at the 2-year mark, I said, this was a great experience, but this isn't something that I see myself doing long term. And in 2026, this is the year that I'm going to be betting on myself.
Okay. And so now you are doing keynote speaking.
Yep.
You're writing a book on post-traumatic growth.
Yep.
You're training for the Paralympics. Again, that voice telling me I'm lazy is really loud. It's very inconvenient. What do people need to understand about resilience that the kind of highlight reel version of your story doesn't tell?
Somebody framed resilience to me or defined resilience to me in a way that has really stuck with me. And they've defined resilience as it's the interval of time that you allow a bad thing to affect you. So the shorter the interval, the stronger your resilience. And what I took that as, I was like, okay, how come I was able to bounce back so quickly from all these different adversity that I had suffered like throughout my life? How was I able to shorten that interval? And it was one common theme for me was when I redirected my effort towards others, towards like serving others in service. And that had been a part of my life growing up. I went to a high school where our motto was meant for others, like service to others. That's what drew me to the military, the ability to like serve others. And when I was in consulting, I didn't really feel like I was serving others. I felt like I was serving corporations, so on and so forth. So for me, the way that I like to talk to people about resilience and how to be more resilient and how to shorten that interval of time, it's find ways to shorten that interval of time in others. So whatever your experience is with trauma, with adversity, with setbacks, try to help somebody going through something similar, shorten that interval for them. Because for me, it was powerful when I was talking to other veterans that were wounded at Walter Reed in the physical therapy rooms in and around, like things that helped them overcome. Because it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows for me when I was in recovery. And I needed to hear those stories from other people that there was something better on the other side of it. It might not be in the timeline that you wish.
What is it about when you're in your darkest places doing something for someone else, which almost feels counterintuitive? It almost feels like, but I'm having such a hard time right now. I don't have the energy or the capacity to show up for someone else. So what is it about doing something for someone else, especially in those times, that makes it actually beneficial for you?
It shows that you can still be of value despite what you went through and what you're going through. Like, it doesn't take that much. It could be simple as a phone call. Like, one of your friends, one of your family members is struggling with something. It could be a simple text. Hey, I'm thinking about you. I know you're going through this. Like, I went through something similar. Like, here's what helped me. It doesn't have to be this, you fly across country. Like, you could do that, but
yeah,
I think a lot of people believe that it needs to be this grand gesture when it could be something like super simple.
No, and that makes a lot of sense, that it makes you remember that you are of value, because you can be of value to someone else, even if you're having a hard time showing up for yourself in that moment.
Yeah.
So on the end of these podcasts, I've been asking people to give advice to their younger selves. But for you, given your experience, what advice would you give to someone, could be a Marine, could be non-military, could be civilian, who has gone through something traumatic and they are in the throes of figuring out what to do next? What would you tell them?
Find one person to help and help them. That's what helped me, because I had the same question when I was getting close to retirement. I asked this guy who's pretty significant in the veteran community. I said, hey, a lot of us are leaving the military. We don't want to leave, but we have to leave due to our injuries. Like, what is the advice that you would give to us if we're uncertain on what we want to do? Because a lot of us yeah, we're getting out, but we don't know what job we want to pursue. We don't know what profession, like anything. And his advice is something that I still use to this day. He said, just find a way to help one person. And because however you help that person, typically it's going to be in the way that you're utilizing your skills best to provide the value.
Mm.
So for me, I found that it was through helping individuals who are going through, it doesn't have to be extreme adversity. It could be any form of adversity, and just telling them what worked for me and what I believe will help them out as well.
Well, it seems to be working very well for you. And I'm sure you have made your parents very proud, and you've ended up on that wall. Maybe not in the same uniform that you were expecting, but I'm sure you're very proudly displayed there at home. Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.